I killed my girlfriend's brother. Yesterday I shot my girlfriend's brother. I know how that sounds. I know people are gonna think I'm a murderer. But I'm not, because he never existed. Before you scroll, hear me out. I've known my girlfriend Marie since middle school. We've been dating since freshman year, and it wasn't until I was 24 years old that I met her brother Scott. I had been to her house thousands of times. I was there the day her little sister was born. I was there the day her father died. I was there when her mother got remarried. I was there when her stepdad got arrested and we had to bail him out of jail. I've been there for every major family event. But not once have I seen him. But the day he appears on our porch out of the blue begging for someplace to stay, I'm supposed to be okay with that. Watch as my girlfriend greets this stranger like she's known him her entire life. I pressed her on why I'd never met him. She replied our paths just must have never passed. I asked why she's never mentioned it. She tells me she has plenty of time. I wondered why he wasn't there for any of those mentioned family events. She insisted he was the best man. I pulled up pictures from the day of her mother's wedding. He's not in any of them. I show her this and she says he must have just been unlucky when it came to catching the camera. I was immediately suspicious of this man. All this time there is no reason our paths should have never crossed. But he knows me, he calls my first name, he knows my dad, he knows where I work, he knows my dog's name. I ask how he knows these things, he says Marie told me. I ask why we never met, he says what do you mean we've met plenty of times. We sit at the dinner table, and Marie and Scott share stories of their childhood. Some stories I've heard before, some stories seem so out of character for my girlfriend. Marie has always been a shy girl, and she hates all social events. I was her only friend growing up, but all of a sudden I'm hearing of sleepovers with friends I never knew existed. I once tried taking Marie to a party, but she began crying the moment we pulled up. But now Scott's talking about how rambunctious she was constantly partying and getting in trouble with the cops. Bullshit, she's never done anything illegal in her life. She chews me out if I don't stop at yellow lights. But she sits here and says these stories are true. I don't want to argue, but it seems impossible she could have done these things. We've dated all of high school. How had I never heard this? I begin to think she's hiding things from me. Maybe she isn't the girl I thought she was. But then he slips up and he tells a story that couldn't possibly be true. He tells me how she got caught hooking up with her prom date during sophomore year. I snap, it's impossible, she didn't go to prom that year. Prom night we sat home and watched scary movies. I say we'd been dating since freshman year. There's no way. Scott looks annoyed with me. Marie tells me I must be mistaken, we didn't start dating till senior year. I leave the room convinced Scott isn't who he says he is. How do I prove it? An idea comes to me. I went out to the backyard and called Marie's mother. I ask her about her son, and for a moment she's confused. It's not till I say his name she suddenly sparks to life, non-stop talking about him and all the great memories she has of him. I don't care. I ask if she has any photos of him from when he was a child. She says they're in her scrapbook. I asked her if she could send me pictures of them. She agrees, and after a few moments she gets confused. She can't find the photos. I ask her about Scott's birthday. She doesn't know. She's in shock, rambling, and she hangs up the phone. That night I can't help but feel like something's watching me sleep. Scott has been at our house for a week now. I've heard plenty of stories. I've caught him a lie a few times. He never eats, at least I never see him do. He never goes to the bathroom, he doesn't pay attention when we watch TV. That night I caught him staring into our bedroom. His face sticks right past our doorframe. I woke Marie to tell her what he was doing. She tells me Scott sleeps and walks. Scott sits at the dinner table, he tells a story of how he broke his arm. It was so bad he had to go to the hospital. A thought crossed my mind and I smiled. I leave the room and call a friend who works at the same hospital. I know you're not supposed to do this, but I need the medical records for a man named Scott Tillum. After some harassment, my friend relents. He pulls up his name but tells me there was no one by that name to ever visit that hospital. I have my proof. I don't tell Marie. I just say I want to take Scott out fishing. She doesn't question. She says it will be a good bonding experience for the two of us. That night I caught Scott standing above my bed. I don't move, I don't wake Marie, I just sit there and listen. Scott's frustrated, he mumbles to himself. I hear him say, "Why can't I get into your head?" He leaves the room still mumbling. It's time to take him fishing, that's the cover story at least. I make it look as real as possible, I pack lunches, I bring all my fishing supplies, and I tell him the best bait to use. We chat on the ride and he tells me more stories. I don't listen, I just nod and half-ass reply. I drive us as far out as I can. He doesn't question it. I ask him one question, what he does do for a living. He says he's lost his job, that's why he came to stay with us. I ask what he did before he lost his job, but he can't answer. All those stories and he couldn't make up a job. We arrive at our destination and tuck something into my pocket. It's cold, and the wind blows, but Scott doesn't wear a jacket. We fish for a couple of hours and grab a sandwich from the cooler for both of us. I offer one to him, he says he isn't hungry. Weird, you didn't eat dinner last night, you should be hungry by now. I tell him he has to eat it. He tells me he just doesn't eat much. Now's my time and I pull the item from my pocket, it's a .38 revolver. I tell him to take a bite of the food. I point my gun at him, but yet he refuses. Scott, I know you're not who you say you are. Some of your stories are impossible. There are no photos proving your existence, you don't have medical records, and your own mother doesn't even know your birthday. But I'm willing to look past that all. I'm willing to accept your reality, as long as you take a bite of that sandwich and prove to me that you're real. He smiles and says, no one will ever believe you. I've put enough memories in their head to make sure of that. I smile back at him and shoot. He falls instantly, whatever monster he was, died just as easily as any human. I didn't return home last night. If I returned home to Marie without Scott, who knows what could have happened? I told her we got a little drunk and stayed at a motel. She tells me she hopes we had fun. I don't know how to return to her now. I don't know if I can even return home. I'm stuck. How do I tell my girlfriend I killed her brother? The Patron Saint of Murder. I received a friend request from an odd lady who called herself the Patron Saint of Murder. A cute, petite brunette with shadowy green eyes and pearl white skin. Her profile stood outside the bounds of my carefully constructed list of acceptable attributes. I'm usually very careful about who I accept as an online friend, discerning what I can from available photos. My friend list numbers no more than 300, a ceiling I strictly adhere to. 300 is a good round number, a reasonable circle of influence, an audience easy to follow and respond to. I have made mistakes accepting those obsessed with politics or religion, or recording every single monotonous, dull moment of their lives, from what they eat to when they shit. Those are grounds for a quick and decisive unfriending. Her real name was Cassidy. Well, at least that's how she finally introduced herself. Who knows? Maybe her name was Karen or Dawn. I was just relieved when she finally stopped insisting on me referring to her by that ridiculous epithet. Her posts were disgusting and off-putting. It was a constant recital of murderous statistics and tidbits of information regarding some of the worst serial killers in history. More than once had I pondered pushing the delete button, but I admit I was attracted to her. In private she was more subdued, actually a bit charming. She messaged me at first, and in time we were talking regularly on the phone. Unlike her public posts, we never talked of murderers, killers, or historically insane dictators. We talked mostly about me. She was intensely interested in everything I had to say, delving deeper into each sentence I professed about my life or my desires. She never seemed bored, always expressed a desire to talk about nothing but me. Often I would try to turn the discussion to her and inquire about who she was and where she came from, what did she like, and what did she like to do for fun. She never acquiesced and always turned the conversation back to me. She had sufficiently buttered me up. And then one day she made a proposal. Why don't you come out to Texas? I'd love to hang out with you. My stomach churned. I didn't have the courage to meet her in person, to walk up to her, strutting my massive stature of 5 foot, for inches of pitiful disappointment. An online relationship is all I desired, where I could feign a more than average height, and yet, I found myself agreeing to fly out to Austin, Texas to hang out with her. Flight M314 to Austin was boarding, one last chance to back out. Quit being a coward, I told myself. If she doesn't like you, then say la vie. Is that the saying? It's fucking life, just live it. Determined, I boarded the plane and took my seat, convinced that I would enjoy myself, if only to travel and see a state I had never seen. My diminutive size can sometimes be a blessing, especially when forced to sit in the middle seat, the only seat available when buying a ticket at the last minute, the expense unreasonably beyond what it's worth, crammed between two filthy strangers. I could sit comfortably enough, but I hate when their arms touch my arms. I squeezed past the bodybuilder sitting in the aisle seat and plopped down next to the obnoxious lady sitting in the window seat. I swear, Julie, if Bob doesn't change that presentation, I'm gonna lose it. He is going to get a mouthful from me. Unfortunately, I had to hear her mouthful all throughout boarding. I prayed that the remainder of the passengers would hustle up, toss their bags in the overhead bin, and sit the hell down so we could get through the safety spiel and get in the air, whence all phone calls would have to cease and I would no longer have to listen to this lady yap and yammer about Bob, whom I was beginning to sympathize with. Poor fucking Bob. But of course, boarding is long and tedious. The final passenger made a stink about not getting the seat she wanted. She was a robust woman in her 50s with long blonde hair, streaming down to the small of her back. She wore skin-tight black spandex and a concert t-shirt with long dangling earrings. I was supposed to be in D15, she shouted. The number shocked me. I had dodged a bullet, or I had hoped so, for if she were to convince the flight attendant otherwise, the middle-aged teenage wannabe would be sitting right next to me. Ma'am, you're going to have to take your seat or exit the plane, explained the flight attendant. The blonde pushed aside the flight attendant and bent her head down close to the bodybuilder's face. You're in my seat, she said with a scowl. Then she turned and looked at me with a big wide smile and waved. Hi, babe. She then walked away and peacefully took her assigned seat. The voice sounded familiar. No, it couldn't be, but then again, it sounded just like her. It sounded like Cassidy. I reasoned otherwise. She wouldn't be on the plane. She's in Texas waiting in the airport. Why would she drive or fly to Nashville only to take a flight right back to Texas? I pushed the thought out of my head. It was simply coincidence. There are billions of people and there's bound to be several that sound alike. The plane accelerated and lifted off the ground, pushing my nervous stomach against the back of my seat. The Bob-hating businesswoman next to me immediately fell asleep, like a baby in a car, her head smashed against the window, mouth wide open. She snored, grunted, and grumbled. Lord knows she was dreaming about giving Bob all the hell he deserved. The pilot announced that we were cruising at 34,000 feet and that he was turning off the seat belt sign. We were free to roam about the cabin. I got to piss, the bodybuilder mumbled to himself. He got up out of his seat like an overturned turtle, swinging his bulky biceps, twisting and turning to free his large body. He elbowed me twice, once in the shoulder and another in the temple. Sorry, man. Damned plane ain't made for people like me. Finally free, the bodybuilder dashed up the aisle, unintentionally hitting everyone he passed, trying his best not to piss his pants. The blonde poked her head up and looked back. A smile flashed across her face. She looked with delight at the empty seat next to me. She sashayed down the aisle singing loud a song only she could hear. She squeezed into the empty seat next to me. I love this song. She pulled out her earbud and clumsily shoved it in my ear. Thrashing metal rang through my head. Chaotic distortion pounded through my ear canal. She yanked the earbud out of my ear. That's the shit right there. I'm psyched, Dave. Oh man, we're going to have fun. I turned and looked at her in shock. It's me, Cassidy. She leaned over and whispered, the patron saint of murder. She bellowed out a sonorous laugh, more like a lumberjack than a dainty little woman. But I tried to interject. I thought you were going to catfish me, but you look exactly like your profile. A little shorter than I imagined, but cute. You're a cutie, Dave. I'm so glad you didn't fucking lie. I looked at her in disbelief. The hypocrisy of her statement astounded me. Ah, I see, but did I catfish you? Well, Dave, yes and no. You see, I can't take pictures of myself. A condition I have. No matter how hard I try, there's not a camera in the world that can capture my image, so I just grab a picture of someone I would like to be. It's not a falsehood, but more of a handicap. Ma'am, you're in my seat, interrupted the bodybuilder. You can have my seat. I'm talking to my man. We couldn't get seats together. You understand. She turned, ignoring the bodybuilder as he put his hands in the air in disbelief. Well, ma'am, I would have gladly switched seats if you would have asked. But now I'm not feeling so nice. Get out of my seat or I'll pull you out. He grabbed her by the arm and pulled her up out of the seat. Cassidy grabbed his lower jaw and the back of his head and violently twisted. There was a loud, sharp crack. The bodybuilder's head went limp, his chin lying flat against his back, the back of his head situated above his chest. The body slumped and fell on top of Cassidy. She slung it off and on top of the passengers sitting in the adjacent row. Screeching, hollering, and screaming ensued. A domino of fear fell across the interior of the plane. Terrorists, a man yelled. Get her. She killed a man. Who? Who killed who? There was confusion and pandemonium, a pointing of fingers, and an unsuccessful attempt to identify the assailant. Cassidy happily revealed herself. The flight attendant approached the melee trying to calm the situation and figure out what was happening. She had no idea that there was a dead bodybuilder laying heavily across 3 poor weak passengers. What's happening? Please remain calm and get back to your seats. Cassidy seized her by the hair and pulled her head down. She then bit into her neck, shaking her head from side to side. She ripped out a chunk of meat and flesh, spit it out, and went in for another bite. Bite after bite, she tore into the flight attendant's neck, nearly severing her head from her shoulders. The nearby seats were awash with blood. All the while, the nearest passengers were pleading for someone to do something, but fear had paralyzed us all, for Cassidy's appearance had changed. Her eyes were a sickly yellow and her blonde hair had fallen off, revealing a bald, pale blue skull and pointed ears. Her teeth were sharp and her fingernails long and jagged. Cassidy looked up and felt the top of head. Her chin and chest were covered in blood, meat, and flesh, like a lion deep in an antelope's belly. There was also embarrassment on her face as she searched for her wig. It was obvious that her true hue of skin was blue, the painted face and false color betrayed by the top of her head. Dang, this thing never stays put. She picked up the wig and tossed it aside in disgust. Seeing that I was terrified, she tried her best to assuage my fear. Honey, don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. She stepped over the flight attendant and grabbed me by the arm. She led me to the bathroom and shoved me inside. Now you just stay in here. Mama's going to have a little fun, and then you and me can have some quality time together. She slammed the door shut and made one last request. Don't come out. I'll come get you. When I get going, I can't control myself. I love you. Do you love me? I didn't answer, my throat dry and constricted, my mind muddled with fear and exasperation. Don't worry, in time you will love me. Bitch, get on the ground, a man commanded. I heard shuffling of feet and a band of men barking out various demands. Posse had been assembled. The good guys had finally recognized the evil to be confronted and defeated. There was movement as the men came in closer. Cassidy shrieked and growled. Hell was unleashed. For the next hour I heard suffering and dying, interrupted periodically by gleeful laughter. There was screaming, crying, pleading, scuffling, but never from Cassidy. Cassidy's strength never waned. I hoped and prayed to hear someone announce that the monster was dead. All was safe. Buckle up and get ready to land. It grew quieter as more and more souls were obliterated and dispatched into darkness. Finally, total and complete silence. The door slammed open. Cassidy's eyes, glowing yellow, fiercely contrasted against the dark blood caked all over her face. In fact, her whole body was covered in blood. There was a wide, wicked smile across her face, a mouthful of sharp, uniform teeth. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving in and out. She looked as if she wanted to eat me alive. We're calling the police. They'll be waiting for you. Hope they shoot the shit out of you. The lone survivors, the pilots, were locked safe and sound in their cockpit, or so they thought. That's not nice, Cassidy responded. She pulled me out of the bathroom, dragged me to first class and shoved me into a seat. She walked up to the cockpit door and kicked it in with ease. The pilots tried to fight, but to no avail. The plane tilted. The pilots fell to the floor. She dragged them out of the cockpit. Their throats were slashed, their eyes gouged, their wounds gushing and widening, their lives quickly fading away. Without thinking, I turned and ran away from Cassidy, fear overriding my reason, as if I had any way to escape. The sight of the interior of the plane and the aftermath of Cassidy's massacre was dreadful. There were bodies torn in half, heads severed and tossed about, entrails scattered throughout. There was not one body intact, not even the first kill, the bodybuilder. Cassidy had ripped both of his arms off. The Bob-hating woman torn to pieces. I vomited and broke down in tears. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Cassidy walked around, her face no longer covered in blood, but her complexion reflecting her true nature. She was wiping away the blood from her face but also the makeup. Her pale blue face displayed consternation. Don't worry. This will all burn up in the crash, and besides, a crash from this height tears a body apart. It will look natural. Everybody will think you're dead as well. This ain't my first rodeo. You've done this before? I managed to stammer out. Lord have mercy. He does talk. Yes, Dave, I have done this before. It's the perfect, undetectable crime, and it's fun. But we're going to die as well. We're going to crash. We're going to be in this plane. How in the hell do you expect us to survive? I started breathing heavy, panicking, my legs weakening. I felt as if I was about to pass out. That's up to you. You can be with me or die. You can become one of us. A vampire? She smiled, her teeth dull and normal now. Yes, a vampire, but not like in the movies. You'll still be able to walk about in the daylight. You'll be beholden to me, but that's not bad. I'm the head bitch, Dave. You stick with me and you'll have it made. I told you I loved you and I meant it. I don't care if the feeling is reciprocated as long as I get what I want. She turned and walked towards the cockpit. It's decision time, Dave. Let me push this bird to 13,000 feet. The plane suddenly fell forward and descended quickly. Cassidy made her way to the exterior door and kicked it out. The air exploded in. A roaring sound bellowed through the interior. I was unbalanced and fell to the floor. Cassidy hauled me up by the shirt and pulled me to the door. Give me a thumbs up if you want to live. I immediately shot up my thumb. Not now, silly. When we're outside. She shoved me out into the sky. I tumbled head over feet several times, until finally I leveled out, remembering my training in the army. Make an even surface so you don't tumble through the air. Arms out wide, legs closed together tightly. Cassidy was falling parallel to me about 20 feet away, calm and collected, as if she had done this 100 times before. She turned her head and looked to me. She was waiting on an answer, her eyes wide with anticipation. The ground was approaching fast, my heart uncontrolled and beating sporadically. A sharp pain in my chest, the onset of a heart attack provoked by the fear of impending death. I gave her a thumbs up. Cassidy turned, put her arms down by her side and shot out towards me. She collided into me and wrapped her arms and legs around my body. I felt her sharp teeth sink into my neck. There was a cold, sickening sensation throughout my body. I heard the flap of exploding fabric. Expecting to see a parachute, I was surprised when instead I saw a leathery pair of pale blue wings extending from Cassidy's back. I remember thinking that this was the worst date ever. My heart quickened, then slowed down to nothing. I gasped for air. I either died or passed out. Whatever the case may be, I awoke and found myself in a comfortable room with a cozy fire and an elaborate bed. I am a slave. I'm allowed to go as I please. It's no use in escaping. I am what I am. Dead to the world, dead to myself, and alive only for her, the patron saint of murder. I almost choked to death on my own flesh. It all started with a single pimple on my left cheek. Large enough to notice, small enough to disregard. I ignored it and continued brushing my teeth. I made sure to wash my face very thoroughly and went down to my car to drive to school. But as I was backing out of the driveway, I noticed something in the rearview mirror that made me pause. There was another pimple, slightly smaller, nestled right next to the first one. It honestly freaked me out a bit. I was pretty sure that wasn't there before, but I reassured myself that there was no way a pimple could grow that fast. I must have just missed it in the bathroom. By the time I pulled into the school parking lot, the pimples had multiplied into a little cluster. About a dozen little orbs of pus, stuck to my face. I decided then and there that something was wrong. I skipped first period and went straight to the nurse's office. They just came out of nowhere. I know it may seem very sudden, but acne is a completely normal thing for kids your age. This isn't necessarily a typical case of acne, but it's not immediately concerning. I would recommend improving your personal hygiene routine. And if the problem doesn't go away, you should set up an appointment with a dermatologist. She dug around in her cabinet for a moment. Here, she said, handing me a large Band-Aid. You can cover it up with this. As I walked to class, I removed the Band-Aid from its wrapper and carefully stuck it over the cluster of zits. I felt a swell of embarrassment. I probably looked ridiculous. I worried people would stare at me and laugh. When I opened the door to Mr. Whitler's history class, everyone fell silent and turned towards me. I was half right. People were staring, but nobody was laughing. I felt my face flush red with embarrassment. My throat burned and I bit back tears. I quickly looked down and hurried off to my desk. I pulled my hood over my head and my head on my desk. It was a solid 20 seconds before anyone spoke. Mr. Whitler nervously cleared his throat. As I was saying, the Native Americans all edged that the United States had violated their treaty by allowing settlers past. Most of my classmates' attention had turned back to Mr. Whitler, but I could feel a couple gazes straggle on me. I already knew that the reaction I got wasn't just because of a silly-looking Band-Aid. But that didn't stop my heart from sinking into my stomach as I snuck a peek at my face in the warped reflection of the metallic table leg. The entire left side of my face was covered in clusters of angry red zits. From the bottom of my jaw to just above my eyebrow, my skin was entirely composed of pimples, none of them more than 1/10 of an inch apart. I looked like a mutated, deformed monster from some old movie. I started to feel lightheaded. I waited for class to end. Felt like forever. I didn't look at my reflection for the rest of my class, because I worried that if I did, I would burst out into tears and draw even more attention to myself. When the bell rang, I pushed past everyone else and quickly walked to my car, keeping my head down the entire time. I knew that by the time I got to the car, I would see that my face had gotten much worse. But when I got onto the jet black asphalt of the parking lot, I realized how much worse it was without even seeing my reflection. You know how when you close one of your eyes, you can see your nose at the edge of your vision? And it looks out of focus and blurry and it obscures your vision a bit. My vision was obscured by tiny blurry dots around my eyes, like specks of dirt around the frames of your glasses. I reached up to my face and felt the area around my eyes, and sure enough, there were zits. One protruding out of my upper left eyelid, another nestled into the corner of my right eye. In fact, now that I was paying attention, I realized that when I blinked, I couldn't close my right eye all the way. I drove straight home. It was one of those drives that seems to last forever. It was like when I was a little kid getting sent home from school early for misbehaving, and I would sit in the back seat waiting for my mom or dad to chew me out in uncomfortable silence. Except this time I was all alone. After I pulled the car into the driveway, I turned off the engine, I Googled and called around, and started trying to set up a dermatologist appointment as soon as I possibly could. Eventually, I found a doctor that could see me the next morning at 5 a.m. After I set it up, I just sat in the car for a few minutes, thinking, God, what will I tell mom and dad when they get home? What will they think of me? Maybe this was a silly thing of me to think. They were my parents, of course they would support me and try to help. But I guess part of me didn't want to see them look at me with the same look of disgust everyone else had. It was around 1 o'clock when I got out of the car. I realized that I hadn't eaten all day, so I went to the kitchen and started making myself a peanut butter sandwich. I didn't have the energy to make anything else. As I sat down and took a bite, I felt a sharp pain in my mouth. I rushed over to the bathroom to take a look in the mirror. The zits had spread from my left cheek, past the center of my face, and were starting to invade the right side. But that wasn't the cause of the pain. Pimples had begun to grow on my lips, not just around my mouth area, but on my lips in my mouth. It seemed like they were made of the same sensitive skin as lips, and were raw-looking, almost swollen. One of them, one of the ones on the inside of my mouth, seemed to have popped. I think it grew a little too tall, and when I went to take a bit of the sandwich, I must have bitten down on the pimple. I wiped the pus off of the inside of my lip, wincing in pain a bit. I went back to my sandwich, taking special care to keep my lips far out of the path of my teeth. Slowly chewed through the bread until I was left with one final piece. But as I scarfed it down, a little piece of the bread got caught in my throat. Made sense. I was so afraid of biting my lip, I must have not chewed it up properly. It wasn't big enough to choke me, it just went down the wrong pipe. I went to the bathroom sink to try and cough it up, but it wouldn't budge. I tried hacking it up, or washing it down with water, but nothing seemed to work. In fact, it felt like it was getting worse. It was getting harder to breathe, and I was starting to panic. Eventually, I decided to shove a finger down my throat to try and make myself gag it up. But the moment my finger brushed up against a smooth lump of skin lodged just within my reach, I realized what was really happening. The zits were starting to grow on the inside of my throat, and they were big and getting even bigger. As I felt around the inside of my throat, I realized that there were more. Lots more. Gagging. I pulled my finger from my throat, retching and coughing. I tried to catch my breath, but I couldn't get enough air. I was being strangled from the inside, and it wouldn't be long before I couldn't breathe at all. I started crying in fear. I didn't know what to do. I was dying. I had one last reckless hope in the back of my mind. A knife. I need a knife. I threw open the bathroom door and ran to the kitchen. I frantically rummaged in the drawer before my fingers curled around the handle of a small knife. I tried to breath out, but I found I couldn't. The pimples had grown into my nostrils, blocking off all air entirely. My throat was blocked off too. I sprinted back to bathroom, clutching the knife. I hastily stood myself in front of the mirror and opened my mouth as wide as I could. So wide it hurt. I saw the wall of flesh that formed at the back of my throat. As my head started to spin, I reached the knife into my mouth and started cutting. The blade punctured the wall of pimples like a tomato. The pimples burst immediately, gushing pus into my throat. The pain was immense and unbearable. I instinctively recoiled and tried to pull the knife from my mouth, but I cut a deep wound into the roof of my mouth. But I wasn't done yet. I had to keep cutting. I sliced deeper, cutting away the zits crowding the walls of my throat, indiscriminately annihilating everything in my path. I choked and cried and screamed against the vile soup of blood and pus and saliva gathering in my gullet. I started to pass out as I felt the blade stab through my Adam's apple. But the last thing I remember is that I just kept cutting. I woke up in the hospital a few days later. Miraculously, I had survived. Mom had come home early and found me bleeding out on the bathroom floor and had immediately rushed me to the hospital. I have stayed in that hospital for 3 months now. The doctors have no explanation for what has happened to me. The best explanation they have is that it must be some sort of genetic defect. They say that it's probably not actually acne, that it instead might be some bizarre form of cancer. They've tried everything to fix it. They thoroughly scrub my face multiple times a day, which usually hurts. They've tried injecting me with all sorts of drugs, but none of them work. I can't stand it when my family and friends comes to visit. I don't like seeing them cringe in horror at my condition. I haven't been able to speak since cutting into my throat, and sometimes that makes me feel relieved. Yesterday they told me that the growths in the back of my throat are starting to reform. They said that they didn't feel that it was safe to surgically remove them due to the damage my throat has already sustained. So tomorrow morning they're going to put in a breathing tube. I don't know what I'm going to do.